everyone, it's Max, and today I am here with all of the horror media I have consumed the last few months. So at the, near the end of September, I was really in the mood for some spooky, Halloween-y stuff. So I started watching a bunch of it. I also got really into a horror YouTuber named Possessed by Horror. I will leave her channel linked down below. She's amazing. I am now obsessed with her. I got most of these recommendations from her videos, so I hope you enjoy. I do have a huge list here, but I am going over some mostly spooky things, but I did psych myself out for a week and only watch fun, Halloween classics that aren't scary because I was home alone watching a house and I just terrified myself. Now I was too scared to watch demon movies because I knew I was going to be house sitting a bunch this month, and I'm usually only scared of demon ghost horror, and so I didn't watch any of it, and then I kind of regretted it because I watched a bunch of break-in horror and that was not a good idea. But let's just get on with it. The first movie I'm gonna be talking about is The Visit, which was actually, I found out later, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And I know there are some sketchy things in this, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was creepy. It's about these two kids who go to visit their grandparents who they've never met. Their mom puts them on a train and they go and visit them, but something is just up. They're just a little weird. And the twist was good. It was creepy. The climax was pretty good. I honestly overall enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. The next movie I'm going to talk about is The Lodge. This is about two kids who go with their dad and their dad's fiance to their lodge that they stay at a lot of times over Christmas, and the dad has to leave to go do business, and then there ends up being a huge storm, so he's not able to come back, and it is about these two kids and their dad's fiance, and stuff from her past starts coming to light. This was okay. The kids suck. Let me just say that. They really suck. And it was just a little slow with not much gratification. Not a whole lot happens, and it just kind of felt like we were waiting for this payoff and it never really came. So I gave it a 3.25 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was The Strangers, which features Liv Tyler. It was fine. It's about this couple who come back from a wedding and they are staying at kind of a remote cabin, and then strangers come to the door. And it's okay. I know a lot of people, it really freaks a lot of people out, and maybe it ended up actually freaking me out more than I thought it did in the coming weeks. But when I watched it originally, it was just fine. The acting was okay. It just kind of felt a little flat for me, but I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was Death of Me, which follows a couple who go to somewhere, maybe I can't remember what country, and they end up taking this drinking this substance that makes them forget the entire night. But they watch this video that was recorded on the man's phone, and it shows him killing the girl. And this was good. This was crazy. It was a little weird. It was in definitely a good way. It has Maggie Q in it, who's iconic. It was honestly, yeah, ended up being pretty good. A little obvious. I didn't think it was very surprising in some ways, but in other ways it was kind of okay, kind of weird. But overall, I thought it was a good watch, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched, and the first movie I actually watched in October, was His House, which is about two immigrants who are given this house in England, and it ends up really messing with their minds. What I really like about this is that so many times in horror films, I'm like, why don't you just move? Really, why don't just move? And so many times it's, we've invested all our money in this house, we can't move, and it just gets so old. But in this, the British government's you can't move, because they are running away from their country. What is that? Refugees. England's you can't have a job, you can't do this, you can't do that, and they cannot move. They have to stay in the house provided for them. And so that made it better in my mind, where I was okay, see, that makes sense. that I get. So that was good. There was a twist that ended up like really, really shocking me and kind of like changed my perception of the couple. And that was interesting. And I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was Malignant on HBO Max, and I feel like I've seen people talk about this a fair amount, and I did not like this. I mean, it was so obvious. Like, people were like, oh my gosh, the twist. And I'm like, that was a twist? I kind of thought that that was implied the entire time. It is about this girl who husband ends up dying, and she is plagued by this thing that cops don't think is real, but she knows it's real and all that stuff. And I mean, there was like some twist to it where but it was really like, it wasn't like really a twist. It was like, I guess like half of it. It was just the other half that, I don't know, I didn't quite like, I didn't get, but it was just bad. But then it turned into a whole full-on action movie, and it was ridiculous. It was just so over the top and so long, and it just didn't need to be. And it was just like, the reveals were so stupid, and like the writing was bad. And this was by, I think, wasn't it by like James Wan or something, like directed by, who's a very famous horror movie director, and it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out, and it was so bad, and I gave it a 1.75 out of 5 stars. Next movie I watched was Night House, which was also really bad. This is about a girl whose husband committed suicide, and she starts learning some pretty dark things about him. Now, this movie went like in 2 directions, and I wish it had only gone in one, where it kind of became like a cult movie, but then also like a ghost movie, and like it just like kind of tried to do too many things, and nothing was like wrapped up in like a good way. And this was also long and just so unnecessary, and it just ended up like there was no payoff and no gratification, because it just kind of ended, and it was just like very flat, and I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was Better Watch Out, which is about a girl who is hired to like babysit this kid, and it is a home invasion movie. This one was actually quite refreshing. The twist I didn't see coming, and then it was like pretty, like it was like nice. It was a fun time. It was a fun time. It was not scary, but it was just a really fun Halloween-y, Christmassy. It was Christmassy movie, because it's definitely set at winter, holidays, but just like a good time. Like, you know, I'm like, it was just fun. It was a good time. It wasn't scary, but it's kids, you know, and it's the same kids who are in The Visit, actually. And it was just a good time. So I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, just because it was a good time. The next movie I watched was There Was Someone Inside Your House, and it sucked. It sucked. Possessed by Horror actually liked it, and I don't understand it. I don't get it. I thought it was terrible. I thought it was so predictable, so obvious. The acting was pretty bad. It was just so tropey, and I didn't like it one bit. It was just really stupid. Just really, really stupid. I think the characters made stupid decisions. It tried to like have like a commentary, but like it just fell really flat, and I just didn't like it, and I gave it a 1.25 out of 5 stars, gonna be honest. I even liked Malignant more than this one. Okay, the next thing I finished was a TV show, and that was Midnight Mass. It was okay. The acting was great. The story itself was interesting, but I just had such a hard time being like, oh yeah, and the entire island doesn't know about vampires? Like, it's just so obvious that I'm like, really, the entire island, no one on this island believes it's a vampire. So this is about a guy who spends some time in prison. I don't know if it's manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, or what, but he was driving drunk and killed someone. And so then when he gets out of prison, he has to go home, which is on this island. But the priest has been gone for a while, kind of like on a religious sabbatical, and a new priest comes to replace him, and stuff is different. It was like okay, but it was very, very predictable in a lot of ways. And this is by the same director and or writer who did Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, Oculus, Gerald's Game, Hush, you know, so like really prolific, has some really great stuff. This just kind of fell a little flat for me because I was literally like, does no one know about vampires? No one. No one's gonna bring up vampires. And this takes place like in the real world. So it's not like, you know, a world where it's like, oh, vampires just aren't part of their lore, or way back in the day where like Dracula hasn't become popular yet. Like this is today. And so I'm just like, really, no one's gonna bring up the idea of vampires? No? Okay. And it just, that really ruined it for me. It was too long. The episodes were too long, and it just kind of, the last 2 episodes, yes, were really good, but people were like, that makes up for the rest of the season. And I'm like, no, it really doesn't. And honestly, if it had been any longer, like I think it's 7 episodes, and if it had been any longer, no way. Another show that I didn't put on this list and I forgot to mention was American Horror Story. I watched the first 2.5 seasons and I'm not going to continue. I kind of honestly find it boring. The Murder House was okay. The beginning was good, it was solid, but I found on both the first and second seasons, it just goes too long. Like, and this is before the 10 episode kind of season became like the norm. But they really only should have been 10 episodes maximum. It was like, it literally happened where it almost felt like the climax of the season hit, and then they had like 3 extra episodes, and I'm like, why are we still going? Why are we still watching this season? Like, it's been wrapped up, and it happened in the first 2 seasons, and I just could not get through the 3rd season. And yeah, I am no longer watching American Horror Story. I wanted to watch the slasher like summer camp one, but it just kind of, I hear like that's like actually one of its weaker seasons, and it's basically a Jason Friday the 13th like total ripoff. So it just kind of, yeah, I'm giving the season, I don't know what to give the series, but I just didn't like it, so I'm no longer continuing. The next movie I watched was Malevolent, and I watched this with my best friend. It is about a team of ghost hunters who don't believe in ghosts. They kind of scam people, but when they are brought to an orphanage, they realize that ghosts are real. It was fine. There were a couple jump scares. Yep. There was a couple times where we screamed, and it was pretty fun. There was a twist that was good. You know, it was like very run-of-the-mill, but I hadn't watched a movie that had made me actually like scream and like, you know, clutch at like a pillow. So I enjoyed it. I had a good time because I was actually spooked. And so that was fun. And I ended up giving it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was Till Death, which is the Megan Fox's new horror movie. And this was like a fun time. It's about a woman who goes to her lake house with her husband, and then she ends up being handcuffed to her husband's dead corpse. It was fun. I wish there was more explanation of the backstory, because like she has a run-in with like people who are trying to kill her, and like she has a history with one of them, and I wish that was explored more. And it did, the scenes did end up dragging a little bit, but overall I had a good time, and I gave it like a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Then I watched the newest Blair Witch. So there's Blair Witch Project, then the sequel, and then there's like a newer one. I watched the newer one. It was fine. It's because Possessed by Horror literally said like this was like this, like the climax was one of the scariest that she's seen in a while. And maybe it's because the way I watched it kept buffering, and I just didn't find it scary. And very much like a little too similar to the original, where I'm like, okay, like they're doing the exact same thing, but stupider. Honestly, being a lot stupider, because like at least our first 3 characters like didn't know that people were missing, and then this force basically kills people. But our new main characters like know that, and so I think it's like they're just so stupid. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I watched A Classic Horror Story, which was a good time. This is about a group of people who basically, I think, use an Uber and then end up being stranded in a cult forest, basically. This was surprising in a good way. I had a good time. It's Italian. I did watch it dubbed because I usually watch these while working, and so I just can't read the subtitles because I'm doing other things while I watch them. But this was like a good time. It was fun, it was campy, but also like it had some twists. It was creepy. There were some legit creepy parts. The tongue clicking where they're like I was like, yeah, that is freaky. But overall, I did actually really, really like it. And I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Next movie I watched was Gerald's Game because of Midnight Mass, and I realized this director slash writer and or writer, you know, did all of these shows and movies, and I watched Oculus years and years and years ago, and I want to rewatch it. Watched Hush when it first came out, hadn't seen Gerald's Game, but it had been on my radar for a while, but now I've seen like all of his like main work, and so Gerald's Game was okay. It is based on Stephen King, and Stephen King always has to have some sort of like parent child pedophilia, and I'm just like, did it add anything to the story? No, it did not. It added nothing to the story, so it just felt so like, why have it if it does nothing for the story? Like, it doesn't do anything. Like, I literally watched these scenes and I'm like, so why? This does nothing. This adds nothing to her story, so why are we watching this? Why do you have this? And so that was an issue, but overall I did enjoy it. I think the actress was phenomenal. I really like her. I've seen her in other things, including Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor, and I do enjoy the actress. I can't remember her name a lot, and I think she was on her A game during this. Her acting was phenomenal, especially because like she's the only one basically for most of the movie, and so I think she just did a great job. But overall, just that pedophilia, and this isn't the director's fault, it's Stephen King's fault, but it took me out of it where I'm like, is there a point? And there wasn't. So I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next movie I watched was Funny Games, the American version. If you don't know what Funny Games is, there was a writer-director who wrote it, I think first in Swedish, maybe Danish, in a different language, and that's his original language. But then he did a shot-for-shot remake in English with Naomi Watts, and this was what tipped me over the edge with like house sitting and being totally freaked out. So it's about this family that goes to their lake house, and their neighbors who they're friends with introduce them to these kids that are staying with them. Well, it turns out the kids aren't keeping these kids at their house by choice, and the kids being like, you know, between like 17 and like 25-year-old men. I like don't know their age, but like they're younger, around my age, and they play some really messed up games with these families, and it is, you know, I knew what like to expect going into it because it's so famous and I've known about it for years. Another one that I just like wanted to watch but just haven't. I have now, and it was really great. It was really great. The acting was great. The guys were so creepy. Really enjoyed it. I knew what the ending was gonna be, but well, like in a way, but I didn't know like when stuff was gonna happen or how it was going to happen. And then the very last scene, chills, ugh. But really enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really well done. The next movie I watched was Honeymoon, which is with Rose Leslie, aka Ygritte, aka Jon Snow / Kit Harington's wife, which I didn't know going into it. So I saw her and I was like, Rose Leslie? And it is about a couple who, for their honeymoon, go to her old house or her old like cabin or something, and stuff ends up happening. This was good. I enjoyed it. One of the last visuals really was like, whoa. But overall, I did actually really like it. It was a good time. It was a little creepy, nothing like outright scary, but still like it was just spooky. It just fit the spooky atmosphere, you know? And that is really a lot of these movies, just fit the spooky atmosphere. Not a lot of these were actively like scary, but I did enjoy Honeymoon, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. After this, psyched myself out, right? Funny Games, just did it in for me, and so I watched a bunch of fun classic Halloween movies, starting with The Nightmare Before Christmas. This is the first time I have seen Nightmare Before Christmas, and it was a good time. I feel like the premise or the moral is basically like, don't change who you are. Like, you like don't, but not in a good way. Like, it's like, oh, just even if you're bored with your life, even if you're bored with like this, what you think is like your destiny, don't change. And I'm like, that's not a great moral. So it's like basically like just be complacent. And you know, but overall it was a good time. Sally was a boss. The way she like fell and then just like stitched herself back together, I was like, that is a baller move. But overall it was like fine. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, because like, I mean, Tim Burton and his stop motion and like stuff, and like the fact that it's like such a classic, I get it, but I just didn't love it. Next movie I watched for the first time was Hocus Pocus, with Sarah Jessica Parker, Bette Midler, and that other actress that I have no idea who she is. This is about 3 witches who were burned at the stake like at least a couple hundred years ago and curse this town, and then they come back to life because this kid does something, and now these kids have to stop them. It was a good time. Again, you know, very campy, but Kenny Ortega is the director, so like I expected nothing less. I get that it's like a cult classic. It was like good, you know, it was a good time, whatever. Gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Then I watched all the Halloweentown movies. Halloweentown 2, Calabar's Revenge, Halloweentown High, and Return to Halloweentown. You know, we love them. 'Tis the season. Love these movies. These are the movies that I grew up with, right? Disney Channel, when they changed the actress, it was like this big thing. Like, it was just a good time. Love them. They're classics. And I gave them in between 4, you know, Halloweentown High I did really like, and I think it has a good message. I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars. Second one I gave a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It's definitely its weakest one. And then the last one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. So a good time. The next movie I watched was one that really scared me when I was younger, like terrified me. I watched it in a movie theater with a babysitter and like screamed, cried, like the whole works. And I watched it again and it was not scary. And that was 1408 with John Cusack. Now I like the story. It's about a writer who goes to a haunted hotel room to write about it. And he's a cynic. He doesn't believe in it, but then, you know, he gets a haunting of a lifetime. Now, if this happened to me in real life, terrified. I would be terrified. But the movie wasn't scary. And I'm like, wow, younger me was a wimp. Because it wasn't scary. I don't even know where I would have been screaming and crying because it just wasn't scary. But I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then I watched the cultural phenomenon that is Squid Games. Now I'm refilming this because I thought so my first clip, like once it hits 25 minutes, it like stops recording. So like I saw it start to flash yellow. So I stopped, thought I hit record to like record this, but then didn't. And so like my screen went black, which basically means like, hey, you didn't record it. But I didn't like get that. So I started recording from like where I thought I ended this clip on to the end. So honestly, I can't remember how much I talked about Squid Game, but this is like about a guy, like what happens when you put people who are already at their worst under terrible circumstances, like terrible strain and stress, and like being like, the only options you have are terrible. It's amazing, and I'm gonna end it here because the rest of the clip talks about it. My camera just went black for a second. This is really fun. I love this for me. But I love Squid Game. It was amazing. I really hope there's a second season. If there isn't, I'm going to be so sad. What if it wasn't recording, so that's why it went black? I'm like really scared. Well, anyways, this is about, you know, it's kind of just saying, like, how I pitch it is it's taking people that are already at their worst and putting them under terrible circumstances where it's basically choosing the lesser of two evils the whole time. I loved it. I need a second season. I mean, it was so huge, there's gotta be a second season, but also it's not gonna be out for a while because I'm sure this took forever to film. Because, I mean, The budget is huge. I looked it up. I think it took like 16 million US dollars to film. Like, holy cow. But it was just so good. And if you're like scared to watch it because of the hype, don't be. It's phenomenal. I did watch it dubbed, I know, but it's because I was working and I hear that's just like, yeah, the speaking was not great. The voice actors did not do a great job. But overall, it was just still so good. The message was amazing. The games were crazy. And I just need a second season. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars. All right, and then the last movie I watched in October, but I am going to be talking about another one, is The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. And it was terrible. It's based, of course, on true story because Ed and Lorraine Warren are real people about a guy who kills his family, but he tries to tell people that the devil made him do it. It was just bad. It was not scary. There were a couple like what it was supposed to be scary moments, but like nothing about it was like, I wasn't watching it being like, oh, they're trying to make it scary. I'm just not finding it scary. Like, no, nothing about it was really scary. And it didn't seem like they were trying to make it scary, which like The Conjuring is a scary franchise. So it was just bad. Yeah, gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. And then the last movie I watched was In the Tall Grass, which is again based on Stephen King novella. And this one I liked more, well, no, I can't say I liked it more than Gerald's Game, but like I liked like what happened in it more. Cokes, what are you doing? Sorry, my dog is like right here, but we're almost done. And it was just like, it was good. It's about this pregnant woman and her brother who hear this little boy crying from the grass asking them to come help him. Well, they go into the grass, get lost, and they realize there's no way out. And it was good. It's an interesting premise. I remember Possessed by Horror was saying how like something really, really gruesome happens in the short story that she understands why they toned it down for the movie. I'm assuming it has to do with her pregnancy because nothing else was really like, nothing else about it made me think like that would have been something that they toned down besides the accumulation of her pregnancy, shall we say, because yeah, it wasn't bad in the movie, but knowing Stephen King, it was probably pretty bad in the book because that's Stephen King. But overall, I had a good time with it and I gave it a 3.25 out of 5 stars. All right, everyone, that is it. That is the 27 things, like spooky, atmospheric things I watched these past few months. Let me know if you've watched any of these or if you have any recommendations for me going forward on what spooky films you loved, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.